Hello and welcome to this video from zonalaudio.com. Today we're going to be taking an in-depth look at producing Hardgroove techno. We're going to be using this project file, Hardgroove Drum Tools, which you can download now from zonalaudio.com. If you do like this kind of content, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you see future videos. And you can also take a look at our previous videos where there's quite a lot of in-depth production tutorials on various types of electronic music and in particular techno. If you do download this product, you will download a zip file which contains a folder which has the ZA Hardgroove Drum Tools project inside it, and you could open up either of these .ils's. We have Cascade and Stacked. Basically, one version has the loops in stages and one is all on top of one another so that we can drag and drop in different elements, which we'll go into in a bit more detail later. But let's just dive right in and take a look at this one, entitled one. So within the project, this is a group and we can actually expand the group and drag in anything we want into our project. I've just grabbed the whole group in for now and it looks like this. And we will see common themes throughout this tutorial about what helps us achieve a good, solid Hardgroove style techno track. We can summarize some of this into saying a few things that we want: a short kick, we want top loops, and we want vocal chops and stabs. And also a common element is some kind of tribal drums. So we'll start by playing this loop. All of them have a little bit of structure just to demonstrate how the sounds can be used and transitioned. Okay, so you'll hear quite an interesting sound at the end there, which is on this channel. You can see we've got tons of expression controls here. I should say to get the absolute most out of this, if you did want to go ahead and purchase it, we are using Ableton Live Suite. So things like hybrid reverb, expression control, LFOs, envelope followers, you will need Suite to make the most out of these. Let's just start with the kick bass group. And one thing I'll mention here is that the group processing is super important. Most of these on the kind of the master group, if you like, also have some processing on the group. I would consider whether you want things like vocals and chords and stuff to be within that. You might want to separate them from this kind of processing. But just to give an example, we have one group here and then a group within a group for the kick bass. So let's just listen with and without the group processing. So without the overall group processing, and then here's the processing for the kick, bass, and also some of the drums. So you can hear how much that really lifts up the sound and glues all the individual parts together. So just to break this down a little bit, and also to mention, a key element of this kind of group processing is to not simply add gain over and over again in each process. It's quite important to make sure that the processing that we're doing isn't simply making it louder, because that will always just sound better by default to how our ears work. So with the processing, this is coming in at -9. Note that we have a limiter set at -9, and in terms of gain reduction, it's just doing a little bit, so kind of -3 dB without the processing. It's coming in at -10.5. So we are adding a little bit of gain with all the processing, however, not a significant amount to completely skew the sound. Now, if I were to turn up every channel 1 dB in here, we now get a readout of just over -9. So now note that when I turn on and off the group processing, it sounds louder, but it technically isn't. All the processing that we're doing is essentially, in some senses, we're reducing the dynamic gain, but we're also increasing the perceived loudness. So jump there of that section from right, it's hitting exactly -9 right now, and then when we turn it on, it's still going to be exactly -9, but it sounds significantly louder, more punchy, more powerful. So the limiter will be working a touch harder now that we've increased the individual channels. But just to break down this processing, the auto filter is just purely for a cut. We've got the automation there, so that's just structure. That's not really doing anything to the sound. Okay, then the first saturator, soft sine, a lot of drive, compensated on the output, and then just a tiny bit of dry wet. And then the next saturator on medium curve, a little bit of drive, a little bit of compensation, and then a higher dry wet. So this is kind of all about setting up your device and just treating it carefully, basically. Go through some different options, see what it's like with a lot of drive, see what it's like on a tiny drive. If you're using like a lot of drive, then just mixing in the dry wet just to kind of give a little bit of grittiness and grunge to your layer. And just, yeah, always pay attention to the sound that it's creating, and if you can, do ABs where the gain is matched to what it would be on the way in. So here, -9.5. So it's actually turning it down just a touch, but we're not going to be too concerned about 0.5 dB here and there. So the EQ, just for a little bit of mud cut here and a little bit of brightness to the high pitch sounds here. When using saturation, we are often increasing frequencies across the frequency spectrum, but it can get particularly detailed and can sound quite muddy. in the kind of 80 to 500 hertz range. So quite often after saturation, you might just want to do some little bit of sweetening EQ. It can also dull the top end a little bit as well. So we're kind of just doing a little bit of corrective EQ after the saturation, and also just cutting out any low end. And then finally a limiter, which is a manual release, which is basically just pulled down until it's starting to kind of grab the sound and make it sound a little bit more energetic. Cool. So to go into the individual parts, we have a kick here. This is using Ableton Stock Rack Selector Kit Warm. It basically has loads of different samples to choose from. So on each different pad of the drum rack, we have the sample selector here. And this was just a case of going through and choosing what sounded nice for each particular use case. Then we have some pre-EQ and then quite a significant processing rack here. So we have the dry, the rumble and the grit, and all of that is then processed with an EQ, saturator and a limiter. So you might say this is a little bit overkill in the fact that we are essentially already doing two layers of group processing here. And this is kind of also in a way group processing because we've got three different signals coming through. But let's have a listen to what these sound like. A nice bit of texture to our kick drum. And then we also have a ghost kick. And the bass. So that's what makes up the majority of our low end. Let's take a look at the rumble. So we have an echo, 100% wet, because we're treating the dry signal, and then some roll off with 27% feedback, dotted eighth note. So not really a great departure from the default settings here, but we have used the filter. It's not modulated, and then we've also kind of reinforced that with some EQ. So on its own, and then with the kick. Adds a nice rhythm. And then the grit layer is a little bit more going on here. So we have two delays. So the delay on 2 and set to 100%, 50% feedback, and then another delay in echo, and this one is only on 40% wet. And then we are overdriving this quite a lot, adding some reverb to it. So to hear on its own. And then we are using this chop and chain device, which you can download for free now on zonalaudio.com. If you've seen many of our other videos, you'll probably have seen this being used, but it's just a really simple dynamics tool. And in this case, we're giving it a 16th note chop and then a quarter note chain. So like a side chain. So without that, it really would muddy up our mix. And this just kind of fills in the gaps between the beats now. And then all that is going into another EQ, saturator and limiter. So you can see this boost here, which looks quite small, but actually this is a 2.85 dB cut at 33.7 hertz. So almost 3 dB of gain at the low fundamental. So this is actually quite significant. So again, it's just some kind of sweetening EQ. Saturator. Just gives it a bit of drive and grit. And then the limiter, not really doing much. It's kind of there as a safety limiter in case any of these things are going too loud. And you know, when we're using the kick selector, if we go to a different kick and add more boom, glue or whatever, it's always going to make sure that we're not going over essentially, well, 0 dB, but minus 3.8. And then we just have a low cut mapped for performance purposes. Cool. Ghost kick is, I think, the same sample, and then just a real simple EQ. That's all going to a send, which isn't related to the project. So let's remove that. We don't need that. Cool. And then the bass line. A lot of the bass line or the low elements in this project are not necessarily synth based, and there's quite a creative choice to be made in terms of making this style of techno, whether you go with a synth bass or a rumble, or maybe even like sample a disco track or something and just use the low end from that with some extra processing. This is kind of a 16th note bass line, so there's just one MIDI note in there, but we've used the arpeggiator to re-trigger. Steps 1, distance 5. Obviously you can play around with that and get some interesting results. But we just left it on 1, keep it nice and simple. This is more about the drums and the bass, but the two do often go hand in hand. I won't go too much into the sound design here, but it's a saw wave with a significant filter envelope on it, some overdrive, some compression or sidechain compression from the kick, and then that is re-emphasized with the chop and chain, and then some pretty weird EQ lifts up that area there, but because we're sidechaining from the kick, we're not too worried about frequency clashes. Okay, this is just like a really simple perc, like an 808 perc from our pack Driving Techno Essentials, which you can download now from zonelaudio.com as well. I will mention you do get some bonus loops and loads of loops that are contained within the project. You don't just get the Ableton project file, you get all the crazy stuff that's been recorded in the creating of this as well. So then in kick bass plus group, we have some top loop. Again, just from Driving Techno Essentials. I don't think any processing whatsoever on this. And then we have an open hat, again from Driving Techno Essentials. So it's a really kind of lo-fi, gritty type sample, but it's got a nice sharp transient that just fits in between the kick really nicely. So I should mention a lot of these sends will work within the project. They are various kind of delay and reverb sends. If you're dragging them into another session, you'll just need to disable them or create an appropriate send. Cool, and then the ride, not much processing on that either. Just a loop from Driving Techno Essentials. And then we have some nonsense. So this being kind of a techno drum tutorial, I think it's often overlooked to use general percussive sounds in your drums and not necessarily like any kind of drum sample. So these are created by the channel below that we'll look at in the middle, and they just kind of underpin the groove and make it a little bit more interesting. So how was this sound created? Well, in a kind of crazy way. We have all these expression controls. Note that they're all set to random. Shout out to, I think Ned Rush is where I picked up this particular technique. He has a really good YouTube channel on kind of experimental electronic music, shall we say. And you can see pretty much everything on the operator is mapped here. And you'll have noticed in that first playback, some pretty random sounds. And if you look at the MIDI note here, we've got different lengths of MIDI notes and in different octaves. So whatever's coming through is likely to be quite atonal anyway. So the actual note that we're playing isn't too much of a concern. But in terms of the actual setup of the sound, the idea is actually to get something very random. And we've left the actual MIDI in here so that you can basically recreate this process for yourself. So these were created by taking a recording of this kind of setup and just letting it do its thing and then going in and choosing some interesting sounds. So if I'm just to grab this audio, take off loop and zoom out, you can see there's a massive recording of lots of nonsense. So like I say, beyond the setup of the loops, you've got lots of crazy audio to get into as well. So let's have a listen to some of what's already there. We have an envelope down. Should say, so this audio is running, but we've used the clip gain envelopes to create the rhythm. So that just goes on and on and on. And if you want to basically go and take a look at how it's done, you can really examine this process here and record some for yourself. Ultimately, you can see that pretty much every parameter or every main parameter of every operator is mapped to expression control. You could go further and use LFOs, or you could do other things on audio effects to get even more interesting results. That kind of thing is exciting and interesting to you, and you are a nerd like me, go ahead and check out our Everything from Nothing video series. The first video basically takes the noise source of echo and uses LFOs in similar ways to create really interesting tones, and then we kind of build up a full track from that. So as mentioned, some vocal effects as well. Where you grab your vocal effects from is totally up to you. YouTube is a great source if you can sample it. I actually have an audio interface which can route the audio back in, which makes it quite easy, but there's lots of other options as to where you get some kind of vocal sample. And bearing in mind, we're using really short sources of audio here, so copyright isn't really going to be an issue. So some random hip-hop vocal chopped up into different slices and then, yeah, just kind of placed to hold a groove. And then we can hear there's quite a lot of delay and choppy effects going on there. So first echo is on 50%, feedback and a dry wet of 10. And then we have the saw down modulation type on the filter. And the filter is set very high and with quite a bit of resonance. So that's that effect on its own. Creates a nice layer. And then some overdrive, some EQ to take out the low end, and then some pretty aggressive pedal. And then another echo, 8th note dotted. The first one is on quarter note dotted. No modulation on this one, just adding an 8th note dotted rhythm basically, 17% wet. Some more EQ, take out the lows. Anytime we do saturation, and then even more so adding filters or whatever delay, we're going to add some low end. So obviously the filter on here is really high, so this isn't particularly going to add any, but if we take this off, you can see there's a lot of low end added there. And that is a lot of the time coming from the pedal. And you can see we increased the bass here because we want to kind of affect frequencies going up into the bass ranges to give it quite a lot of body. But then ultimately we want to take out anything that's going to interfere too much with our kick and bass, and then using chop and chain again for that choppy effect. Cool, the stab, cannot remember where this came from. But yeah, a vocal stab. We have an LFO on the fade out, so some will sound a bit sharper and choppier than others. Then we have some EQ to take out some of the resonance and mud and low end, obviously. And then we have some parallel processing here. So on the dry channel, we just have a little bit of saturation and EQ. And notice we're taking the highs out of the dry, and on the wet is where the kind of sparkly noisiness is coming at the top. So have an echo, 100% wet, quarter note dotted, 50%. Then the filter is set up similar to the other one that we looked at. And then we have overdrive, well, chop and chain to kind of add some dynamics to the filter, overdrive, EQ8, saturation, pedal. So a lot of processing going on here to get this kind of choppy top rhythm to the vocal stab. So just the dry. And then with the wet, we can blend in as much of this as we like. So you hear at the end there, that one that kind of carried on a little bit longer, that was the LFO working on the fade out there. And then we have some little bit of ear candy, so box effects, a tiny little click there, so let's just put fade in. So resampled from other vocal effects basically. So putting that stab through a big reverb, resampling, reversing, and then using a little bit of clip gain. In fact, we haven't done the clip. Oh yeah, we have. So using a little bit of clip gain to give it more of kind of a whip right at the end. Okay, and then another resample channel. So this is a interesting way to give kind of choppy variations to the beats. So there's quite a lot of processing on here. So do be careful when doing this kind of thing that you're not altering the sound too much. This channel was created for this. So we basically sampled all of the beat that was going on. Remember, if you're doing this, to turn off the group processing before doing that. And let's just turn all of this off. So as you can hear, it's just the beat and then chopped up into little parts and repeated. And then, yeah, lots of processing to give a little bit more variety and texture to the sound. It's sidechained from the kick there. When this is happening, the kick isn't playing. That's more for when this is playing. And then a reverse kick as well. So then let's listen to all of that. So that's going to be it for this video. The project does have, as you can see, a total of 7 of these loops in. In future videos, we're going to go through in more detail about how to produce some of the loops. There's full demos of all of them on the website, zonalaudio.com. And like I say, we're going to be doing more of these. So please like and subscribe and ring the bell to be notified for when they are released. Until then, enjoy making some techno. Cheers. Bye now.